Without further ado, let's give Dan the floor to give us a strategic overview of what's happening now in the Middle East and in how rosy situation Israel is. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that this war is probably the most important event of the 21st century in terms of its effect on the global balance of power, and something that, in my view, is more important than the global balance of power, and this is the cultural reality, because what is at stake here is not only a strategic issue, not only a military, territorial, economic issue, but it is also an attempt by Israel, not by choice, but we don't have a choice, to challenge the zeitgeist that developed in Europe and in the United States, in the West in general, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. One of the reasons that Israel is in such a difficult situation is that we are challenging much more than the interest of a certain power in a certain part of the world. We are challenging how people in the West are looking at the world. And I think this is tremendously important for what will happen in the next generation. And very often, and this time again, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. And what will come out of this confrontation, I think I know what is coming out, and what is coming out I think is very good from an Israeli point of view. It will affect the world. It is already affecting the world, not only in the Middle East, but far beyond the Middle East, deep into Western civilization. Because the enemy of Israel in this war is not only Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, but progressiveness. Or to be more specific, the impact of progressives on liberals. In other words, the impact of the bad guys over the good guys. The good guys are the liberals who are saying, when we fight our enemy, we will fight with one hand tied behind our back, because we don't want to stoop down to the level of our enemies. We don't want to be barbarians like Hamas or Hezbollah. What the progressives are saying, take your second hand behind your back as well and make yourself indefensible, because self-defense is illegitimate because it doesn't look good and because people are killed. And not asking themselves, what is the alternatives of something that doesn't look good, I think they undermine the ability of Western civilization to defend itself. And because everything that Western civilization has achieved is against human nature. Pluralism is against human nature. The kind of human rights that we want to promote are against human nature. What we know about human nature, we can read the Bible if you want, is if you don't like somebody, kill him. Even if it is your brother. And even if it is only because you envy him on something. And human nature is nasty. And civilization is about saying, wait a minute, if we restrain ourselves from achieving immediate objectives, we can get much more than if we go for it immediately. And these categories of questions are now at stake. The most important question that is at stake in this war is, can civilized people defend themselves against barbarians when a lot of other civilized people are trying to undermine their ability to defend themselves? That's a very crucial cultural question beyond the economic questions that are extremely important, beyond the strategic questions that are being determined now, as we speak, in the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf. And I'd like to give you a picture of what Iran tried to do and the enormous success that Iran achieved before we even go specifically into Gaza, into Beirut, into what happened in Syria and in Tehran. First of all, to understand what is going on in the broad context, die große Zusammenhänge, the broad strategic significance of what we are seeing unfolding in front of our eyes. In Iran, we have a barbaric regime. And by the way, we've seen it before. A very able people governed by a very barbaric regime. We have seen it 80 years ago, very close to where we are sitting here today. And the problem was not that there was something essentially wrong with the German people, but there was something essentially wrong with the Nazis, and they need to be broken, humiliated, not reaching a compromise with them. Whatever is not very bad for them is catastrophic for us. It is a zero-sum game with the Iranian regime that took control 47 years ago in 1979. And because the Iranians as a people are sophisticated, because they can see things in a strategic context and they have historic patience, they don't seek immediate rewards. They're willing to invest so that they can get far greater rewards down the line. What they wanted to do is to hegemonize the Middle East on their way to become a major player in the global balance of power. How do you do it? First of all, the Arabs are weak. And the first to know how weak the Arabs are the Arabs. I think they've learned it in the late 70s, in the early 80s, exactly when Khomeini came to power in Iran. Remember, in the same year, Egypt and Israel signed the peace treaty, 1979, and Khomeini came to Tehran victorious. And the weakness of the Arab world, the extreme opposite of what Sadat, thank you. I'll put it here. So. Okay. The extreme opposite of what Nasser tried to build between 1954, when he came to power, and his death in 1970, namely this idea of one Arab charismatic leader that pools all the resources of the Arab world and a lot of the resources from the Muslim world and can establish himself in this region as a hegemon. And Nasser was a hegemon in the Middle East in the 1960s. His war in 1967, he brought together all the resources of the Arab world against Israel. He managed to bring Jordan into the war in spite of the fact that the Jordanians wanted peace with Israel. They didn't have a choice but to make war with Israel because Nasser could dictate what his worst enemies were doing. His worst enemies had to do what he wanted against their interest. This is being a hegemon. You don't have to occupy a country to do that. For instance, in the Six-Day War, King Hussein brought an Egyptian general to command the Jordanian army, so that when we approached King Hussein on the 5th of June and said to him, if you stop bombarding Jerusalem, we will not touch the West Bank. He said, it's beyond me. Or if you want his exact words, the chips are down, we are at war. He didn't have a choice anymore. The king couldn't tell his army what to do because he knew that if he doesn't bring an Egyptian general to command his own army. His own people will kill him. This is what being a hegemon means, that you can dictate without the responsibility of occupation. You can do whatever you want in the whole region, and everybody will do whatever you dictate them to do, and your investment is relatively small. It's the best way of control, that people will do what you want without you taking the responsibility of what will happen to them if they do what you want. This is what being a hegemon means. And the Iranians, with their great abilities, facing the Arabs with their great failures. The Arab world is the most outstanding failure of modern history compared to what they could have been with the resources that they have. And we only have very few exceptions in the Arab world to this failure. The United Arab Emirates is a good example of what Arabs could have done with their opportunities. So when the Arabs are so weak and the Iranians are so sophisticated, all you have to do is to have a lot of money from your oil, to use it in order to build a very strong army, to finance your proxies, to use all the tensions in different parts of the Arab world so that you slowly take over one country after another. And on the 7th of October, Iran completely controlled Lebanon, completely controlled Syria, controlled Iraq, controlled the Houthis, and were in the process of controlling other Arab states, trying to do it as far as Morocco. And the Iranians were very successful in their very sophisticated program, saying the following: we will control all the energy of the Middle East, and the whole world depends on the energy coming from the Middle East. We will control Mecca and Medina, so 1.5, 2 billion Muslims will, one way or another, whether they're Sunnis or Shiites, will be under our influence. And when we do it, all we have to do is to say good morning to the Europeans, and then the Europeans will do what they always do in recent generations, namely, first of all, collaborate and then capitulate. The French are the ones that were leading the way. I constantly say this, particularly I enjoy saying it to French ambassadors in Israel. The French may not have invented prostitution, but they perfected it. So you know that when you're strong, the Europeans will collaborate and capitulate. That's what Europeans do. And why was it so effective? Because it was designed to neutralize the two enemies, the only enemies that Iran has. And the Iranians were very good in identifying them, the big Satan and the small Satan. And they're right. We are their worst enemies, their only enemies. All the others are weak, like the Arabs, insignificant, like the Europeans, or supporting, like the Chinese or the Russians and the North Koreans. The enemies are only the United States and Israel. Now, the United States is very, very powerful, and Israel is much less powerful. But Israel is always powerful and determined, and the United States is more powerful and can have accidents like Barack Obama, the worst president America had in foreign policy since the Second World War. By the way, a great orator and a nice person. I don't like nice persons. I like people like Richard Nixon. Nasty. In other words, he must defend freedom. To defend freedom, you shouldn't be nice. You should be nasty. People shouldn't love you. They should be afraid of you. This is the only thing that can defend freedom. So, when you have America, you have a very powerful nation that can sometimes behave like Barack Obama, wanting to weaken America, feeling bad about American strengths, or like Biden, where you don't need to wait for old age to be senile. You can do it in an earlier age. And in both cases, let's reach an agreement. In other words, let's accept the terms of the Iranians. For instance, the Iranians are the best negotiators in the world. Who does Barack Obama send to negotiate with them? The dumbest foreign minister the United States ever had, John Kerry. By the way, the Palestinians...
By the way, Jewish.
He had...
Baptized, yes.
Only anti-Semite thinks that Jews are clever. I live in a Jewish state, and if I had a penny for every idiot, I would be a multi-billionaire. Okay? So, you need to do something that will neutralize your worst enemies, America and Israel, but particularly Israel. But because Israel will do something about it. The Americans will sometimes understand that there is a problem, but they may have an Obama. When the Israelis understand that they have a problem, first they kill you, then they find out if they were right. Okay, it is called preemption. Now, the Iranian strategy vis-à-vis Israel was brilliant. You create for Iran a border with Israel, so Israel borders with Iran, but Iran doesn't border with Israel. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the radical elements in the West Bank, possibly even part of Israeli Arabs, and Assad, and all these attrition Israel, and they can hurt Israel in a way that I'll explain in a minute. And when Israel responds, Iran does not suffer. So Iran benefits from war and doesn't suffer from war. This is brilliant. This is excellent. And what was the overall project? It was, first you have these people embedded in civilian population, which gives them immunity because the progressives impacting the liberals will not allow Israel to act in civilian population, and you put 100% of your assets in civilian population. So this is number one of the immunity. Under this immunity, you build a huge number of missiles. We're speaking about, we were facing in Lebanon 150,000 projectiles. No air defense system or missile defense system can deal with these numbers. And the Iranians were on the verge of building tens of thousands of ballistic missiles that can attack Israel from Iran. So, even if this cannot destroy Israel, it can destroy the Israeli success story. Israel is first and foremost a success story. And therefore, when you have a war, which is the most difficult we had since 1948, the major problem Israel has is that the shekel is too strong. We have a shekel, we have a dollar of 2.9 shekels. I want a dollar that is 4 shekels, okay? It's much better for Israeli export. So this is the kind of problem we're having. Because we are a success story. In my view, the greatest success story of modern times. If you have this kind of threat, It is threatening the Israeli success story. So, the progressives are your shield, making it possible for you to create the second immunity with missiles. And these missiles create the ability to build the ultimate immunity, namely nuclear weapons. And the nuclear weapons are not to be used. The nuclear weapons, even the missiles are not to be used. The missiles are, and the nuclear weapons is to give you immunity. In other words, you will control, you will strangulate the world, and everybody will have to capitulate to you, and nobody can respond because you have civilian population, missiles, and nuclear weapons. And it worked brilliantly. And then we were lucky. And a great pro-Zionist called Yahya Sinwar made war on the 7th of October. The best thing that happened to Israel in very many years. Now, did we suffer in the first 2 days? Yes. Did we lose 1,200 people? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. Are we guilty not being prepared for it? Militarily, in terms of intelligence, politically, yes. But within a week or two, Israel recuperated. And what we needed for 2.5 years, if I were a better performer, I would sing it to you. And here are the words without inflicting on you my incapability to think. All we are saying is give war a chance. Okay? In other words, now that they provoked us, let us destroy them. But destroy them in a way that the New York Times will be against us. Because if the New York Times is not against us, we are not doing the right thing. The New York Times and the BBC and CNN and the United Nations and the court in The Hague and all the people who want civilized people to be incapable of defending themselves because they feel guilty. Or if you want to use a terrible word, they feel white. Because one of the interesting things about progressives is that they are very similar to fascists in 3 categories. They're racist, they're oppressives, and they're anti-Semitic. They're racist. The only difference is the fascists say black is bad, the progressives say white is bad. They are oppressive because if you don't say exactly what they want in the way they change every week, if you don't say it 3 times a day, they cancel you. They destroy you. You don't have a livelihood. You see it less in Europe, more in the United States. They contaminate the American higher education system. You know, I have friends, children, grandchildren in Gaza, and they ask me, are you not worried? I said, things could be worse. They could be in Harvard. Then they would come back intellectually retarded and morally sick. Because this is what they teach you in Harvard and in Columbia and in Yale and in the best universities, used to be the best universities, because they were contaminated by progressives. And good guys, liberals, wanted to show that they're as good as the progressives. And this is what happened to the Democratic Party in the United States. So the question was, can Israel find an answer to the very sophisticated plan? And we didn't know in the beginning that we will be lucky enough to have a long war in so many fronts. First, we were given the opportunity to deal with Gaza. Thank God. Now, Gaza is the most fortified position ever in human history. Because it is fortified not only by missiles and tunnels, it is fortified by the New York Times and the BBC and CNN and the United Nations and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and all the bad people that you can possibly imagine. Again, what is bad about them? Civilized people are not allowed to defend themselves. They're white. By the way, they say whites brought colonialism. No. Everybody is a colonialist throughout human history. Who stopped colonialism? White people. They say whites brought slavery. No, slavery was always, all of human history was slavery, until the British, against their economic interest, were fighting slavery and the slave trade in the 19th century. Whites saved the world from slavery. And the blacks complain because they want to whine, and some people are stupid enough to feel guilty about it. So these are the enemies of Western civilization. Western civilization is not perfect. It also brought us Nazism, okay? The difference is it also brought good things. And everything we benefit from today is a product of Western civilization. So it's worth defending even if it is not perfect. And it is not perfect. And as a Jew, I know that it is not perfect, okay? But we came to Gaza and we've done what we must do in Gaza, namely destroy it, bring destruction on Gaza. Now, there was an operational need because every school, every hospital, every mosque was a military position. Every house was a military position. If you don't want thousands of Israeli soldiers killed, you have to destroy Gaza. But I'm also happy with the outcome, because the only way moderate Arabs can defend themselves against radical Arabs is to tell them, you see what happens when you fight Israel? There is total destruction. So if you don't want Cairo to look like Gaza, help us to fight against the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. If you don't want Amman to look like Gaza, help us to fight against the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. The Muslim Brotherhood, or the sentiment that the Muslim Brotherhood reflects, is the reason for the backwardness and the failure of the Arab world. The Arab world, with a few exceptions, is backward and failing. And by the way, the only time they had a relatively good life was under colonialism. Okay? Ask yourself seriously, without ideology, how did people in Egypt live better? Under British control or with their independent government? Egypt is on the verge of hunger. Egypt has no future because of what Arabs did to Arabs. And this is true about Iraq and about Lebanon and about Syria, the majority of this region. So in Gaza, we demonstrated that we can ignore the New York Times, and people will not love us. I'm sorry. My grandmother used to say that it's better to be rich, young, and healthy, better than sick, poor, and old. I agree. So if we could do the right thing and still everybody would love us, it would not fit into Jewish history, but I can live with it. But if people don't love us, I'm sorry. Will it hurt me? Yes. The alternative is a catastrophe. If we would have listened to Europe, God forbid, if any time we would have listened to Europe, Israel would be exterminated. And the world would look much worse than it is today. For instance, If we would have listened to Europe, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons. If we would have listened to Europe, Assad would have had nuclear weapons. Imagine what happens in the region when Sadat and Assad have nuclear weapons. Everybody has nuclear weapons, and then we can number the days on this earth. It must be destroyed, and the Europeans, because you must do it, the Europeans are against it. Because they live in La La Land, because they're not willing to take responsibility, because they work 24/7 to make Europe irrelevant. Europeans get up in the morning and say, what else can I do to make Europe irrelevant? And then they do it. And the result is that in Gaza we didn't solve the problem. Gaza doesn't have a problem, it doesn't have a solution. We have been fighting in Gaza for 100 years. We will be fighting in Gaza for the next 100 years. Because the barbarians in Gaza, not just Hamas, the society in Gaza is barbaric, Muslim Brotherhood. And all they want is to kill Jews. They're not interested in their children, they're not interested in their future. The only question is, can we build our life in spite of the need to fight in Gaza to become better and better? We did it for 100 years. Why not for the next 100 years? Okay, again, if you're not hated by the New York Times, you're doing the wrong thing. If suddenly the New York Times would support Israel, I would be very worried. Or the United Nations, or the courts in The Hague, or what is called human rights organizations. They came up as a very legitimate and positive phenomenon in the 1980s, but they became terrorist supporters by equating symmetrically barbarians and civilized people. That's what they do. So that's Gaza. In Lebanon, the problem was that with the huge number of rockets and missiles, including accurate missiles, Israel, and this I can tell you from speaking with all the decision makers, we thought here is a strategic problem that we don't have a good response to. Because again, we will survive, but the success story of Israel will not survive if for months and months you cannot live anywhere in Israel, including the major cities. And then we were lucky that Nasrallah made war with us, and we didn't have a choice, and we destroyed them in Beirut. And the important thing is Beirut. It doesn't matter what the question is. The answer is always bomb Beirut. Okay? That's the answer. Now you can come up with the question. Because they cannot take it. They don't care if their people are dead. They care if you hit Beirut. So because it hurts them, you hit Beirut. What time is it? I hit Beirut. Whatever the question, the answer is hit Beirut. And in, I think, less than 30 seconds, we threw 82 tons of bombs into the middle of Beirut to kill Nasrallah. Against the will of the Americans. This was the Biden administration. And it's a good thing. Killing people is really something that you should start your morning with. And there are so many people in the Middle East who deserve to be killed, who you cannot in any other way communicate with. They wanted so much to be close to Allah. We can speed up the process. No bureaucracy, no red tape, immediate success. You want to be a martyr? Just give us a call. We will reach out and touch somebody. And Lebanon became, from a strategic problem we did not have an answer to a major inconvenience or a major harassment to Israel, a major nuisance, but not a strategic threat. It is not. Again, is there a solution to Hezbollah? No. But have we given the Lebanese government, this Lebanese government that is responsible, the president, the prime minister, and the foreign minister, have we given them the opportunity to at least try to establish Lebanese sovereignty against Hezbollah? Yes. Will it succeed? I don't know. But for the first time since 1969, a Lebanese government has a chance to establish Lebanese sovereignty. And then Israel can leave Lebanon and live happily ever after. We don't have any kind of dispute or any kind of problem with Lebanon. But again, even if we don't succeed, the fact that Lebanon became from a strategic threat to a major nuisance is an enormous positive change. And then Syria fell. And then the air route from Israel to Tehran became open because Lebanon is not a problem, Syria is not a problem. In Iraq, you've recently seen what we've done there to make it less of a problem. So the Israeli Air Force, which is not a strategic global air force, acted as if it was a strategic global air force. By the way, using American aircraft 30% better than the Americans. Okay? So we had the option. And then the Iranians, in a very uncharacteristic way, became stupid. And again, I'm delighted they gave war a chance. They were stupid enough to attack Israel directly in April and then in October 24. When Iranian missiles were falling on Israel, I was dancing with joy. I was saying, and by the way, one major part of a missile fell 20 yards from my apartment. Okay, so when I needed a point at the end of my dance, it came with this missile, which immediately found a parking place in Tel Aviv. For me, it's very difficult, but this missile just arrived from Iran and immediately could find a parking place. And the Iranians were stupid enough to bring them into the war. They could make a war against Israel without getting hit by Israel. The best possible thing. And then they're stupid enough to respond to an Iranian general being killed in Damascus by shooting 500 missiles and drones and what have you to Israel. And then it turns out that when they do their worst, it's unpleasant. And then again they do it in October because we killed somebody in Tehran. Always a good idea. And again they're stupid because even Biden could not completely prevent Israel from doing something in Tehran. And then came Trump. Let me tell you something about Trump. Something religious. I mean, what I'm about to say now, I should say in a church or a synagogue or a place of worship. I finally have proof that God has a sense of humor. Because otherwise I cannot explain why he sent a clown to save Western civilization. Okay? So here is this person who cannot build a coherent sentence and certainly not build a coherent strategy, but he has excellent instincts. He says, these are the bad guys, let's kill them. You know, it's simple, but it's true. My way as an academic of ridiculing people like me is to say, Oedipus, Schmidipus, as long as you love your mother. In other words, sometimes Forget the very flowery descriptions. What is the core? And with the help of the United States, by not preventing us, before the Americans became directly involved, the problem was Obama and Biden preventing Israel. And then when they stopped preventing us, we came to Tehran to redecorate the city. And when we did it and prepared the way, and Iran was without air defense systems, then Trump sent his beautiful B-2s and he bombarded with the bombs we don't have, the places that we need to bombard. And then on the 28th of February, America and Israel go together to war. Now, here's an interesting thing. There is NATO, isn't there? Or at least there should have been. The only country America can go to war with is Israel. And then the Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, I'm sorry, I have to be updated. The Secretary of War and the commander of CENTCOM say the two strongest air forces in the world are now acting in Tehran. You have Israel and the United States, and the two strongest air forces in the world are working there. And the story is not over. But I think I can use a term that you will immediately identify. This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. But maybe it is the end of the beginning. In other words, the important thing, namely to kill them and to kill their leaders and to transmit the message, you're not a legitimate enemy. You're a bunch of barbarians. So we don't negotiate with you, we kill you. Okay, Ayatollah, Shmayatollah, we kill you. Because you're just a barbarian. And again, not the Iranian people. The Iranian people, when they get rid of this regime, the only two countries in the Middle East who will be successful are Israel and Iran, and the UAE. And if they get rid of Erdogan, perhaps Turkey. Unfortunately, I don't see any others. I wish I could. And one thing is already over, and this is Iranian hegemony of the Middle East. Unless Obama becomes president again tomorrow, and I don't think this is about to happen, Iran was demoted from a first-rate regional power to a fifth-rate regional power, because its vulnerability was exposed and because its ability to harm is limited. Still considerable. They can cause a lot of problems, but the problems are not to Israel and not to America. They are to China. Good. They are to Europe. Okay. They're much less to America. Yes, it can impact the midterm elections. Yes, price of oil in America goes, but America can go without Middle Eastern oil. Europe can't. But it's not our war. Okay? No, it's not our war, because somebody else must fight for you. Because the Europeans have given up the idea of self-defense. Because even if Germany will spend $100 billion on building an army, they don't have a people that is willing to defend this way of life. People are not willing to defend their country. There is something wrong, profoundly wrong, with the young generation in Europe, with the support of their parents, because they're not willing to defend. People who are not willing to defend themselves I have no respect for them whatsoever. They can be great musicians, great mathematicians, beautiful ballet dancers, okay? But people who don't defend themselves don't have a future. People who constantly say, we will bitch, and when the Americans defend us instead of us defending us, we will complain about the Americans not defending us enough, but are not willing to do anything about it. So what happened in this war so far is that Iran and all the proxies became dramatically weaker. Israel became dramatically stronger. Actually, Israel is the only real power in the Middle East. Turkey is not exactly a Middle Eastern power, it's partly European, so I don't count it. Iran is no longer a power. Egypt, I'm sorry to say, hardly survives. Saudi Arabia is a financial power, but that's it. Saudi Arabia can't defend itself. They spend billions on the best aircrafts and best weapons. The only problem is they don't have an army. They have weapons and people who serve the weapons, but they can't defend themselves. They don't even try to defend themselves. That's not a power. That's having a lot of money. That's not a power. Why is that important? Because if America wants to go to the China Sea, as America should, who will they leave the Middle East with? With the American aircraft carriers in the China Sea. Who will take care of Middle Eastern radicals? So if you're a European or just a person who doesn't know what he's talking about, you will say, why do you need anybody? If you leave the Middle East alone, people in the Middle East have a tendency to make house calls. They come to you, okay, to the Twin Towers, to the Pentagon, because most bad things are rooted in the Middle East, and they need to export it. This is the goods that they can give the world. So you need somebody here to fight the radicals. Who can fight the radicals? Egypt, that is afraid to defend itself from the Houthis in spite of the fact that the Houthis destroyed the Suez Canal as the only source of revenue in Egypt, and Egypt is hungry because of the Houthis, and Egypt has a huge army, and this army cannot do anything. By the way, in Egypt, it's not a country that has an army, it's an army that has a country. Okay, corrupt to the core, controlling 40% of the Egyptian economy. So Egypt is not a player. The only power in the Middle East that is strong enough and determined enough to fight against radicals is Israel. So you may not like Israel, but you have to respect Israel. And if I have the choice between being liked and being respected, I'd rather be respected. I've been liked for thousands of years. Every time they slaughtered us, they loved us. I think we had enough sympathy. Now let's have some respect. And they don't have a choice. In other words, people who realize how strong Israel is know that they can hurt Israel, and they will. And many European countries do. But the alternative is very different. I promised Tomasz that I will end exactly on the hour, so I have 9 minutes more. Let me now address the field where we have lost, okay? Because we won strategically in the Middle East. In America, we have a problem, but I think our bargaining position is stronger in spite of problems that we're having, but we lost very badly in Western public opinion. And let me say something about that. The reason people in Western public opinion don't like us is the reason that I mentioned in the beginning of my lecture. Namely, that we are actually fighting, thank you, we are actually fighting against the zeitgeist that was developed here after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Namely, we live in a new world. We have an international community. People use this term, it means nothing, it's a joke. But what do they mean? Oh, the United Nations. Anything international is by definition prostituted, because the members are the regimes, and the overwhelming majority of the regimes are autocratic, dictatorial, or barbarian. So the organization that is ruled by majority of countries where you don't have majority rule are prostituted because the barbarians are in power and the Europeans capitulate. If I need to sum up the United Nations, that's it. The barbarians control and the Europeans capitulate. And then they have these nice words, which means nothing. The United Nations is a non-entity. You have a war in the Ukraine. Who expects anything from the United Nations? Anybody here? Can I see hands? It's a joke. It's a bunch of people who sit there and they engaged in PR masturbation. This is what the United Nations is all about. They bullshit things that mean nothing. Whatever they do mean nothing. And every organization is prostituted by the barbarians. The health organization, the education organization, it all starts with targeting Israel, and after a while, the barbarians control human rights in the United Nations. And they discuss democracy and pluralism and human rights. And unless the only attitude to any international organization is pure disgust, it is a sad joke on our willingness to cheat ourselves in this regard. So Israel is very weak in international organizations. The good news is that our situation today is better than it will be tomorrow. It's getting worse. Who cares? 160 nations said we should establish a Palestinian state, including Britain and Canada and Australia and France and Ireland and Norway and Slovenia. And who cares? 160. Let me bring here a lesson in mathematics. 160 equals 0. The significance of it is 0. It is a non-existent reality because it is a UN reality, not a balance of power reality. So that's one thing. Newspapers. Most of the media in the world are prostituted by people who are under the influence of the progressives. So they're not even trying to pretend that they give you a good summary of events. Every journalist has a message. He is a prophet. He has something to say. Now, if he had something to say, he wouldn't be a journalist. And when he's a journalist, he has nothing to say. There are few exceptions here and there, but the whole profession is prostituted. So, the media, with very few exceptions, are our enemies. What else is new? We prove that this zeitgeist that has developed is not only unjustified, but also it doesn't work. If we would have followed it, the barbarians would rule the world. So the reason they hate us is not anti-Semitism. But once they hate us, there is the arsenal of anti-Semitism, and this is where they get their weapons. For instance, New York Times and the blood libel. Israel has trained dogs to rape Palestinians. The New York Times. Okay, it used to be a newspaper. It's a joke. So, what I'm saying is, it's extremely uncomfortable, but Israel is strong enough to ignore it, and since it was there anyway, it is a good thing that it is exposed. The worst situation is something bad that looks good. Harvard was bad and looked good. The New York Times was bad and looked good. Amnesty International was bad and looked good. And now, any fair-minded person can see it. Am I happy about it? No. Have we lost there? Yes. Will it cost us? Yes. But here is the last thing that I want to say in this regard. All of this, we have a problem with it, but no dilemma. The problem is they can hurt us, and they do, and they will hurt us more. No dilemma, because listening to them is not an option. If we listen to that, we will be committing suicide. And it may take long, and it may be uncomfortable, but we are strong enough in order to go through a difficult patch. I will say one sentence that I'm sure I will be asked about, and I will speak about it later. We have, on the one hand, the worst government that Israel ever had, and on the other hand, the Israeli society is the eighth wonder of the world, with resilience that is unbelievable. And if you hear stories about how the Israeli society is being torn apart, and you want to believe it, have fun. It's okay. You will not understand what's happening in Israel, but enjoy. Israel is facing Herculean challenges, and we are capable of dealing with it. If I may, let me end with a joke. It's not funny, but it is instructive.
What if I said no?
I don't really care. You know, if I couldn't handle people who tell me no in the beginning, I would have a very dull life. The story is about the Almighty, that we've already mentioned today, and he decided that he's sick and tired of the human race, and he wants to eliminate the human race. And he will use a flood, but comme il faut, wie es sich gehört, a real flood. No Noah, no ark, no dove, no olive branch, a flood. And he calls the leaders of the three monotheistic religions, and he says to them, go to your people and tell them that in 2 weeks everything will be over. So the Christian comes to his community and he says, look, we have sinned. We have 2 weeks. Let us do good deeds. Let's pray. Maybe God will reconsider. The Muslim says, it's all because of the Jews. And the Jew says, guys, we have 2 weeks to learn how to live underwater.
All right, so there is a microphone, so whoever wants to say something can comment, then the floor is opened. Sasha Tomsky is the first. Wait for the microphone.
Well, we heard some very strong words for the start. I think the situation is complicated. Can Israel completely ignore the public opinion of the West if that hatred, which is now common everywhere, is going to increase? It's going to be worse and worse. The whole world, or the Western world, will turn against Israel. Do you think that this is no problem whatsoever? It must have some impact. I don't know what impact, but it must have some impact. That's one question. The other I have, you exaggerate a little bit to the Israeli society, because I was very worried when in Israel the socialist governments came up with this idea of Oslo records, you know, of this accords in Oslo. You know, they thought they could somehow make peace with Arafat and all that. My father thought that was the end of Israel, you know, at the time, in the 60s, 67, after 67. So, and today, again, I don't read the left-wing papers, but I believe that Israel is deeply divided. It's very dangerous for Israel society to survive if one half hates the other, even if they combine forces under great danger. That's obvious. But you know, there were attacks on the government from the left, saying that this government is genocidal. No, total nonsense, of course. This government is racist. You heard it from Israeli politicians, not just in the West. So that's a very strange problem for people like me who live outside, you know, don't really know the details of the situation. And then there is the third thing that is worrying. Why can't Israel defeat Hezbollah? It seems that they are doing pretty well. They have drones, and the strategists in Israel didn't think of it, you know, what? So there are three questions, you know. The hatred in the West must be dangerous in the long term. The divided society cannot be healed in Israel. It's just as much as divided as in the States. The left is mad, in my opinion. And the Hezbollah is still a problem. But this naivety of Israel is, I think you said it once somewhere, that they don't border Switzerland.
What?
That Israel doesn't border Switzerland. Switzerland. Szwajcarsko.
That you don't border Switzerland, so...
Okay.
You said it somewhere in Australia, I believe, you know, as a joke. So they were very naive, you know, to think that Hezbollah is what you call it in English, that Hezbollah is a sort of terrorist organization, without realizing that most people in Gaza, actually, you're saying that all the time, most people in Gaza are the same. You know, and 30,000 militants have been killed, and they've got youngsters now to replace it.
Okay.
So the problem is also
three questions
with Israel.
No. Okay, the three. Then it's gonna be Roman Joch.
Can I answer one at a time? Because
no,
I will
No.
forget the question.
I'm just pass the microphone to Roman Joch. You will answer, and
okay.
you will there at the back, but don't give him microphone. He will shut up. He will wait for your answers. You will answer, then he will speak. Okay, let's see if it works. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first of all, can we deal with hostile public opinion? It's difficult. Democratic governments listen to their people. It's legitimate. I know that at the moment, people like Merz in Germany and Meloni want to be much more pro-Israel, and they cannot because of public opinion in Italy and in Germany. And it's a real problem. The question is, what is the alternative? We cannot possibly listen to the kind of advice we get from Europe, because it is ridiculous and the results will be counterproductive. So not having a choice makes it easier to take the decision, but it makes it more difficult to live with the fact that we have to take decisions that are extremely unpopular. But again, we have done things against public opinion and we survived it, and I think that we can compensate for a lot of the criticism by being much stronger than we were ever before, not only militarily, economically, in terms of the Israeli society. I will address this in a moment. So, yes, it is difficult, but I think that the West will wake up, and in a certain way has already woken up. I don't think that it's an accident that today the measure of your hatred to Israel and the degree of your commitment to the left are identical. The more left, the more anti-Israel, the more anti-Semitic. And by the way, it is the opposite of what we had in the 50s and 60s, where if you were a socialist, you would support Israel. Take, for instance, Britain. You have on the extreme left, you have Corbyn, who is an anti-Semite terrorist, okay, or supporter of terrorism. Then you have Starmer, who's impotent and unfriendly. Then you have Kemi, the head of the Conservative Party, who is pro-Israel. And then you have Nigel Farage, who's very pro-Israel. And very often, the attitude towards massive uncontrolled immigration and the attitude towards Israel are coinciding. Because people who understand that Europe is committing suicide by opening its gates to uncontrolled immigration are also the people who understand that you cannot commit suicide on other levels. I consider immigration, unlimited immigration, to be the greatest threat today to Western civilization. If this happens, Europe will look like the countries that the immigrants are coming from, like Afghanistan. If you don't, let me put it this way. On immigration, Trump is too moderate, okay? I will not say it, but it sounds good. I think Attila the Hun would be too moderate, okay? I'm not saying it, but it makes me feel good to pretend to have this attitude. So I think things will get better, and if they don't, look, being hated is only difficult in the first 2,000 years. Later, you become used to it, you know? It is cold in the winter and it's hot in the summer and people hate Jews. Okay, you learn to live with it. Israeli society. I think that most Israelis, and certainly almost all the media in Israel, misread what is happening in Israel because they confuse between the fact that the political system in Israel is completely dysfunctioning, in a terrible situation, by the way, like all democracies around the world, okay? There isn't a single Western democracy that functions well. Look at all the democratic countries. In the last 30 years, we've committed many mistakes, including transparency. I think we went far too far with transparency, because today people don't ask themselves what is good, they ask themselves what looks good. They no longer speak to the subject, they speak to the protocol. And I want to go back decades and to say, hey, with all due respect, I won't tell you. What will you do to me? Okay? Or I will not let people come into my country, and if they come, I'll throw them, and I don't care what happens to them. And if they are persecuted in their own country, I'm sorry, but I won't let them destroy my country. If you don't go back to self-defense, if you want to feel good about yourself by saying things that look good but are catastrophic to your future and are irresponsible, this is how democracy looks. And democracy has now, in all Western countries, a major crisis. What is the real question? Is the society split? In America, I suggested to two senators, friends of mine, that America adopts the two-state solution, a democratic state and a Republican state. Okay? Because these people don't speak to each other. In Israel, if it would have happened, the army would collapse. Okay? This is all propaganda of the radical left and the radical right and the idiots in the middle, particularly educated people. The more educated you are, the less you understand the world. Okay? I greet my students when I teach only graduate students, and I tell them, everybody can be a fool, but to be an idiot, you need a graduate degree. Thank you for coming. Because the more educated you are, instead of using your academic qualifications to improve on your common sense, you substitute your common sense with what you learned in the university, and then it turns out like Harvard, where you live in La La Land. You're not connected to reality. You live in a universe of idiots, of degenerated idiots of your own. Okay? So, Israelis are very aggressive. I hope I have given you a good example this evening. Okay? Israelis are very arrogant. Even by Israeli standards, I'm arrogant, which is difficult. There is a lot of competition. And yet, I'm more arrogant than most Israelis. So, we all know what needs to be done, and if somebody doesn't agree with us, we go with him like a brick wall. And I love it. I enjoy shouting at people. I enjoy cursing people. It's fun. And it comes from the fact that we care. Most people, the young generation in Europe and America doesn't care. This is what frightens me. People who don't care. The Israeli society has managed to deal with much more difficult problems. And again, you can be, like I am, very strongly against this government. I think it's the worst government we've ever had. And yet admit that most of the decisions that Netanyahu made during the war were the correct decisions. If you take a step back, every Israeli prime minister that can get public support would do more or less the same. And if he would not make this mistake, he would make another mistake. Basically, Israelis, the overwhelming majority of Israelis, support the war. I am delighted to say that progressivism in Israel committed electoral suicide. In the Knesset, there are no radical progressives. The most left party, the Democratic Party with Yair Golan, I may disagree with Yair, we're good friends. I may disagree with him on this or that, but his positions are reasonable. If he will become prime minister, I don't think it will happen, but if he will become prime minister, I can live with it, it's okay. And the crazy, radical peaceniks are a cult around the Haaretz newspaper, and they don't determine anything in Israel. The Oslo obsession, you know, I came to Rabin when he came up with Oslo, and I told him, you know that in terms of concession I go beyond you, beyond Rabin. But my problem with the Oslo process is the date. Why in September? In the calendar, we have a special day for Oslo, April 1st. So why did you do it in September? It's a joke. You must be stupid. But this kind of stupidity, let's have peace and then we will live happily ever after, is no longer popular in Israel. There is not an electorate for it. They cannot get into the Knesset. So if people want to believe in it, it's okay. Concerning Hezbollah, look, when you have barbarians, you will continue to have barbarians. You live in the Czech Republic, I suppose there are rapists here, right? Even in Czechia. Will there always be rapists? Yes. The question is, can you live a normal life knowing that there are also rapists? Okay? You have the flu, and it's coming every year. And we have had the likes of Hezbollah and Hamas for 100 years. And Israel became stronger, and the Israeli democracy became more sound, and the Israeli science became more developed, and Israeli medicine became more effective, and Israeli culture became more diverse. In other words, you can live alongside barbarians. We have proven it more than any other nation. And in the next 100 years, from time to time, we will have to kill them. Look, you have cockroaches under your sink in the kitchen. What do? You call the exterminator. What happens 3 years later? You have cockroaches. What do? You call the exterminator. But in your kitchen, there is not only cockroaches, you also cook gourmet dinners. So if you cook gourmet dinners 200 times, and every 2 years you have to call the exterminator, you're in a good situation. So, would it be nicer to be surrounded by boring people like the Scandinavians? Yes. Okay, but we don't have a choice. Moses told us that we need to be there, and we have a very good life. And now, and this I'm saying with great sorrow, Jews all over the world, regardless of what Israel is doing, are having a very bad life. So if you want to continue to be a Jew, the safest and best place for you to live is in Israel. And from time to time, there is war, because it's the Middle East, but the war can never come to Central Europe. Imagine, it's unimaginable that one day Putin will invade the Ukraine. It cannot happen. Okay? So I understand, in the Middle East, wars can happen, and in Europe, they cannot happen.
Roman?
Professor Sifton, I listened to your first lecture in Prague in 1991, and for those 35 years, it has always been brilliant. And I now have two...
And he looks the same still, by the way.
Yes, he was the same. And I have two questions. You mentioned the progressive captivity of liberals. You certainly know author James Burnham and his book, The Suicide of the West, 1964. He had described the progressive captivity of liberals. Why do you think it could change?
I have a problem hearing.
Okay,
and I know the microphone is good.
Why do you think progressive captivity of liberals could
Can you repeat?
Why do you think progressive captivity of liberals can be eliminated or can cease to exist?
And the second question, my last one, is there are some people who went to the dark force, like Tucker Carlson. But so far there have been many sensible people like Megyn Kelly or Joe Rogan, who have been sensible, aren't you afraid that the American right could become to be anti-Israeli as the American left is?
Well, first of all, let me start with the second question. Am I concerned that also in the right you have anti-Semites? Because I think that Tucker Carlson is the classic anti-Semite, and Megyn, whatever her name is not much better. She looks better, but I don't think she is better than that. They realize that now it's popular in parts of the MAGA camp, so they use it, and I will not be surprised if to find that Tucker Carlson is also financed by Qatar. I will not at all be surprised. Now, the first question I find extremely important because in the final analysis, liberals are our only hope as a civilization, provided they're not radical liberals. If you go back to American liberalism, there was one of the finest people in the 1950s, a presidential candidate, Adlai Stevenson. And he said the most brilliant thing that I've ever heard about politics. You know the original. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. He said, power corrupts, weakness corrupts absolutely. And I very strongly believe in it. Europe is guilty of being weak. And when you're weak, you want to capitulate because you don't have any other option. And when you see somebody who's not weak, you call him a Nazi because you want a good excuse to capitulate. And Israel is both liberal and strong. Israel must be national and liberal, Jewish and democratic. This is the same thing. And you should always be cognizant of the fact that too much of a good thing is catastrophe. Too much nationalism is fascism. Too much liberalism is progressivism. Too much Jewish identity is ultra-Orthodox and the parasites that ultra-Orthodox are in Israel. The hardcore of ultra-Orthodox in Israel have a way of life that is parasitic, okay? And by the way, I had 2 discussions in British universities that you may be interested in. I always go to British universities because there I can find hostility against Israel and Jews more than any other place, and I enjoy a hostile audience. And let me tell you 2 stories about it. In one British university, I tried to tell them that too much pluralism is the enemy of pluralism. And they said, look, this is a joke. There is no such thing as too much pluralism. You're either a pluralist or you're not. And we were sitting, this was a faculty, and we were sitting 15 people in a room, and I said to them, you know what, let's go to dinner. You will have chicken, you will have beef, you will have halal, you will have kosher, you will have vegetarian, everything is legitimate. And then a cannibal will want to join us for dinner. And my response would be, I insist on knowing if I'm on the guest list or on the menu. In other words, I will reject the cannibal. And they said, who made you the guy to reject, and I said, me. I know that I'm better than the cannibal, and I don't care what you think. And if you cannot, if you want to find the perfect answer, you're a perfect asshole. Okay? This is one story. The other story that I'm very happy with was, again, sitting with the faculty in a British university, and I happened to see some of the people and their children before the meeting. And they told me there cannot be too much of a good thing. And I said, look, I saw you with your children. It looks as if you love them, right? He says, very much. Can you love them too much? He said, no. I said, oh yes, you can. You can become a pedophile. If you want to go all the way, why stop in the middle? Okay? You must know when you have a brilliant argument to engage common sense. Academic life is like Waze when you use it in your car. Do you use it here? Waze or, okay. You should follow its directions, but from time to time, you have to engage your common sense and says, is it leading me in the right direction? Because there is Bethlehem in Israel, and there is Bethlehem in the United States. And you don't want to go in. So we need to speak to liberals, introduce some conservatism in them, because being a radical liberal or a radical conservative or a radical religious or a radical anything will lead to catastrophes. Whatever you do, every value that you pursue, don't pursue it to the maximum. Pursue all the good values to an optimum of the combination of good values. Because otherwise you will be perfect on one value and catastrophic on another, and you want all of them, or at least most of them, so that we can live in the freedom that we enjoy for the first time in human history in recent generations.